I don't think a review is needed for this phone. Like other Sony phones, you generally don't come across one, but more of look for one. Ironically, this one was sold to me and ruins what I just said, but this is a phone for enthusiasts with random pricing of $400 or more, which is insane for something that is on par with the Samsung S21 Ultra. But again, this is not a phone that you come across. It was never in your carrier store. This is the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III, and for some reason, I love it. So for transparency for you, but also because my memory sucks, you will see right here how much I paid for the device, if the video was sponsored and by who, and if I'm going to plan on keeping this phone. Of course, this and pretty much all of my videos are silently sponsored by me. If you use any of the affiliate links or join my channel, you will be helping fund these videos, as most of them don't make enough money to pay back the devices that you see in here. And if you can't or don't want to pay, then that's totally fine. Simply watching the whole video and interacting in any way will help. Thank you for listening, and here is the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III. I want my videos to be like this phone. This phone is one that stands out, but still achieves the same goal as other phone manufacturers. We have familiar things like the frosted back glass and a camera bump, but then we have a power button with the fingerprint scanner in it, as well as a dual stage camera shutter. Just like the power button, this little button here is sunken in and used for the Google Assistant, of course now being used for Gemini. On the other side, we have a SIM tray that feels kind of flimsy, but is removable without a tool, which is pretty cool. There is a headset jack on the top. Surprising, right? The bottom is the least entertaining part, with simply a USB-C 3.1 port, which transfers at 5 gigabits per second, and a microphone. Sony truly made this device in a way that should separate it from the crowd. The front has even more specialties, with the screen being unapologetic, with not only a chin, but a forehead, but both very usable on purpose. On the top of the glass, there's a hole for the front camera, which has little use for a few reasons, but we have the cutout for two front-facing loudspeakers, a single LED for notifications, and a cinematic 4K display. This 21:9 display has a height of 4K, being 1644 by 3840, or 643 pixels per inch. While not seeming like it's a true 4K display, that is arguable, as a 16:9 4K image would be 677 pixels per inch with this size, but a 16:9 3K display would be 508 pixels per inch, so closer to 4K than 3K. That being said, there was an insane 5.5 inch 4K display that produced 801 pixels per inch on the Sony Xperia Z5 Premium about 10 years ago. While not all the time, this is a 4K 120Hz OLED panel that gets bright enough, but is technically lacking in brightness, at least in my book. Definitely feels better than the Xperia 1 Mark II that I reviewed a couple years ago, but apparently it's about the same brightness. While allegedly scratch resistant thanks to Gorilla Glass Victus, the screen costs a lot to buy, so I got a screen protector and I put it here to protect it as much as I can. That said, this phone had some scratches on it before, so it's whatever really. Personally, I would have skipped out on the assistant button and probably made a power button just a little bit easier to push, but having the extras like the two-step camera shutter and the headset jack are a welcome treat that just makes sense. This would be considered a tall phone, but there's a decent amount of devices that actually have a similar height to this phone, but the narrow screen will take some time to get used to. It also makes you realize how bad something like the similar Samsung Fold 3 screen is, being a 25:9 screen on the outside. Being 21:9 is definitely a choice, but one that is made for the 4K screen, as it's technically 2.33 by 1, which is very close to 2.35 by 1 CinemaScope, while 2.39 by 1 is going to be what you generally see at the movie theaters, give or take. An aspect that I do like is the 186/187 grams that this phone weighs. This is a light aluminum and glass phone, and it feels really nice in the hands. Sony makes pretty much every camera sensor. Sure, Samsung makes some sensors, and Sony and Samsung can't be the only camera sensors in the world, but seriously, Sony makes pretty much every camera, from iPhone cameras to Sony cameras to even the Fujifilm GFX 100S. Yes, Sony makes virtually all camera sensors, similar to how DJI makes pretty much all drones. Not 100%, but pretty close. So Sony should make a good camera on your phone, right? Well, they make a good camera app in the basic mode is trying to act like a normal camera app, allowing for easy switching of lenses, rotation support, and just being a safe-ish app. No 4K 60 or 120 here, just classic 4K 30 frames per second and camera lens switches. Switch into auto mode, and then there's no more rotation. You get all the buttons on the right and lots of grayed out ones, not to mention no shutter button on the screen anymore. Then we have program auto, shutter speed priority, manual exposure, and a memory recall mode, all showing you extra buttons like you see now. And at this point, you generally will choose auto or basic unless you know how to shoot on a full-size camera. At least that's what should happen. Instead, this is a phone's camera, and you're still limited by that fact, and that Sony doesn't really do too much to enhance these cameras. While not terrible, images will look different depending on the mode that you choose, which does make sense, but the auto and basic having different looks is just weird to me. There is a Zeiss T-Star coating on this lens, which sounds great, but it doesn't really help much, not even for glare. Then all of these cameras really confuse me if you look into them. The ultra-wide camera is a 12 megapixel IMX363. Yes, the same camera used for the main sensors on the Pixel 3, 4, and 5. It is focusable, but honestly I would say that the images aren't close to what the Pixel 5 is capable of doing. 4K 30 frames per second here, but no 4K 60, which is fine, but this sensor is capable. The main camera is a 12 megapixel wide lens, which is the same sensor as the Xperia 1 Mark II and Xperia 1 Mark IV. But it doesn't feel like there was really any improvement as you would expect. It's honestly a mixed bag really, because some shots look really good and others are just lacking. Of course, throwing a little edit on doesn't hurt, but people want great out of camera shots, not something that you always have to fix up. Then we get the 12 megapixel telephoto sensor, which sits at 3x or a 4.4x zoom. Yes, just like the main camera, it is optically stabilized, but it is also an optically zooming camera, which is like a periscope lens, but not, because something like a 3.3x would be digitally zoomed in. That said, the images look noticeably worse at 4.4x, which it shouldn't because the aperture is barely half a stop different. But having both of those reach, if that's how you would say it, is a welcomed addition. What's also weird is it's the same IMX663 sensor found in the Asus Zenfone 8, Zenfone 9, Google Pixel 6 Pro, and even the Xperia 1 Mark IV. Of course, we're talking about it being the front camera on those phones, which I find bizarre that Sony would put that sensor in for zooming in when their front camera needed that sensor the most. Regardless, I'm going to show you some of the shots that I took, but I will say a few things. For one, the overall image is lacking straight out of camera, but maybe editing in post is by design. Same with video, as you have to use a Cinematic Pro app for 4K 60 or 4K 120 video when it doesn't really need that. Then you have the different color profiles, so shooting log or simple HDR is not here for those formats, meaning that you have to edit in post, or it's just going to look off or bad. There is a time of flight sensor, but it seems like it operates strangely, sometimes being super fast, other times failing to focus altogether. This follows through with low light shots that have some good aspects to them, but does kind of fall apart at times. Overall, the experience feels clunky, even if you're familiar with Sony's camera app setup. The front camera, I almost forgot about, is an 8 megapixel sensor that shoots 1080p 30 frames per second and can only be used in basic mode. It's almost like Sony also forgot about that camera. And now, some shots from the phone. Enjoy. There's something bad but amazing about these cameras, but overall I want more out of these sensors. Now, we don't live in a movie, so we can't just act like we just use this phone for the good parts. After all, a phone is more than just camera and the screen. This phone is powered by the Snapdragon 888 chip, which is still fast nowadays and gets warm when using processor-intensive apps and games, as expected. We get a spectacular 12 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage, with the former being removable thanks to that SIM tray. There is a 4,500 milliamp cell in here, which annoys me. The battery just drains, losing like 20 to 30% a day with the always-on display, but when you use the phone, the battery life is actually pretty good. While not enjoyable, it can definitely be worse, especially with a 4K 120Hz display on this phone. Charging speed is also annoying, with myself only getting about 11 watts out of this 30-watt charging phone. It's because of the charging limitations and protocols that Sony chooses, and I can't get mad at them because they do give a charger in the box. I just wish that my 100 watt, 120 watt, and 140 watt chargers could charge this phone at full speed, which they can on a lot of other devices with even faster charging. But hey, thanks to the reverse wireless charging, you can still charge other things with this phone. While stereo speakers are nice, they definitely could sound better. The dynamic vibration for audio is something I hated in the Xperia 1 Mark II, and this time, I still hate it. It seems to be offbeat and too aggressive, a strange thing because the vibrating motor is neither good or bad on this phone, just kind of in the middle. Connectivity-wise, we get 5G, Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.2, and NFC, of course. There's a little etching on the back to remind you of that. This is also an IP65, IP68 water and dust resistant phone, which I find strange because yeah, it wears off over time and loses its water resistance, but every company should be required to advertise like this, or else people will see bigger number, little number, and go for the company that has big or bigger number. We are all cavemen. Transparency is nice, but also should be required for all that have an IP certification. Going through the interface on this phone is super fast. I never really have any issues. I do see some drops in frames, almost like we go from 120 Hz to 60 Hz. Sometimes that happens, but simply toggling it on and off or just waiting a while will bring it back to normal. The operating system is slightly skinned with Sony's take on Android 13. Yes, Android 13 with a 2023 security patch. So pretty much 2 years after launch, they just stopped. Kind of disappointing when the S21 series came out before this phone and is still on Android 14 with the current security patch. That said, I don't feel like I'm missing much from the software, just some creature comforts that Sony doesn't really want to do anyway. Why is there no face unlock, and why is there no tap to sleep? These should be on here as the power button is poorly made. It feels squishy, and ironically, I replaced one on someone else's phone recently. That said, the rest of the phone feels like a quality made product as it should for a $1,300 MSRP device. I love this phone. Sure, there are some downsides, but not as bad as some other phones. The launch price is brutal, and I would agree that there are some aspects that are actually better than a Samsung S21 Ultra when it launched, but the rest are kind of eclipsed by the S21 Ultra just being a better phone overall. And right now, it's even cheaper. But this is going to be the only phone right now at its used price that will give you 4K 120Hz display with a headset jack and native monitor support for relevant Sony Alpha cameras like the FX3. It's funny calling it relevant because pretty much all of these cameras were from 2019 and newer, but this is a 2021 phone. Right now, it feels like if you want a great phone with a 4K display, this is the perfect phone to buy at that price. But if money isn't a problem, maybe the Xperia 1 Mark V is the phone to buy. But hey, at least the headset jack sounds better in this phone than it did on the Xperia 1 Mark II. And that's my review of the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III. Let me know what you think about this phone. Hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching.